right, that concludes public participation. So we are moving on our agenda. We are on item 13 on our action agenda. Do I have any motions from executive session? Approve the hires. Mr. Hogan.
I'd like to make the motion that we approve selected employment items, Exhibit A, for action.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Huddle. All in favor? All right, that is 7-0. Do I have anything else from executive session? All right, so that takes us to number 14 on the action agenda, which is the certification of delegates for the 2022 Delegate Assembly under Exhibit G. And the way that this works, as I understand, is our district has 6 votes under the School Boards Association, and we have listed all 7 members, so we need 1 alternate and 6 delegates for this form. I believe, Mr. Hogan.
I'll jump on that grenade as an
Yes.
alternate.
All right, so can I have a motion for the 6 delegates?
I may have a conflict with that meeting, so I would like to give mine to Mr. Hogan.
So can I have a motion for the 6 delegates and the 1 alternate?
I move that Mr. Scully, Mr. Satterfield, Ms. Snipes, Mr. Hogan, Ms. Hines, Blackburn Hines, and Ms. Barnhart be our delegates, and Ms. Huddle will be the alternate.
All right, a second. Mr. Hogan, okay. And then all in favor? That's unanimous. All right, that moves us to our discussion agenda. Item 15, the discussion of the proposed 2023-2024 school year calendar, Exhibit H.
Right. Madam Chair, members of the board, Dr. Ross, good evening. I would also like to add my congratulations and welcome to all the new members and officers. I'm looking forward to working with everyone this year. Pursuant to Board Policy IC, about this time every year we will bring to you all a proposed academic calendar for next school year. So I think we're working on getting it on the screen, but it is in your packets, the proposed 2023-2024 year-round modified academic calendar. And the version that you all are seeing, okay, great. Okay, the version that you all are seeing is actually what we informally titled Option C. There have been 2 versions before it. And we shared those versions with several groups, the superintendent's Parents Advisory Council, the Faculty Advisory Council, and our principals. And in fact, we did a survey of District 5 faculty and got about 400 responses with the first 2 versions. And what that feedback really told us was that they weren't happy with the first 2 versions. So using those comments, we developed Option C. And what we were able to see from those comments were the faculty and the parents expressed this, and the principals expressed this in their comments, that the winter break was not long enough. The way the calendar fell, we were starting a little later in August, around the 22nd of the month, which is later than typical for our students to start. So all of those comments and concerns led us to investigate our district transitioning to the year-round modified calendar. And that gives us a lot more flexibility with our start dates and the ability to take more breaks throughout the year. So that is what we are presenting tonight, is the year-round modified calendar. And I'm just going to hit a very few of the highlights on that for you. Our faculty and staff would begin school on August the 7th. Students would begin around August 15th, which is really more like our typical start dates for the district. And then the fall break has been very popular in our calendar for the past few years. and that is included here in October 13th and 16th, which is just prior to the end of the first 9 weeks, which feedback we've gotten from faculty in the past couple of years is they prefer having a teacher work day before the end of the 9 weeks to get grades in and organized for that time. And then we do have 2 full weeks for winter break, which I think is preferred by the faculty and parents for traveling purposes and just having a good break. Everybody needs that. And then you can see the other days that we have in here, the typical holidays, and then we would conclude school for the year on May 31st. So all students and staff would be out of the buildings by the end of May. So I'm presenting this for discussion tonight. I'm happy to answer any questions you have, and then we'll bring it back to you next time for final approval.
Do we have any questions? I know I do, but I'm going to defer to anybody else that may. All right, well, I'll kick the questions off and it may stem some. One of the concerns that I have about this calendar is under state law, it has always been for several years that school does not start before the 3rd Monday of August. And there is several reasons for that that impact the state of South Carolina. So some of those reasons relate to the fact that we are a very service-oriented we have a very service-oriented economy, tourist-oriented economy, and when we start school back early, that pulls kids, students, and their parents out of the workforce, which is one of the reasons why state law implemented that 3rd Monday, the 3rd Monday rule to start after that date, unless there is a modified year-round academic calendar. I'm a little concerned that this isn't actually like a year-round calendar, but it is phrased that way so that we can start a little bit earlier. And I'm a little concerned that we're starting too early. I'm also a little concerned about that as a parent, and as hearing some feedback from some folks, because I've asked about this calendar, about the full 2.5 weeks that we're out of school in December, because that requires working parents to find childcare and other arrangements. So when I have spoken to some teachers and to some parents on PACs, on the PAC and on different teachers across the district, when they asked me about the schedule, the first schedules that they showed, or the schedule that was proposed to the board, was different than what they've seen. So I'm wondering if we've actually presented this particular version again to the PAC, to the SICs, to the different teachers, and we've gotten feedback on this version, because it starts a full week early, and it ends a full week early in the summer, and because they haven't seen this, I'm hesitant to vote on this without actually having some feedback on this calendar.
Yes, ma'am. I'll start with the PAC and the Parents Advisory and the Faculty Advisory. They have not seen option C. The principals have.
Right.
And the principals were pleased with it. We formulated this based on the comments that we received from those advisory councils. So no, they have not seen officially option C, but it was developed based on their feedback.
And just as a point of clarification, if I may, we're not going to ask for action tonight.
No, sir.
So we are going to take all 3 schedules back to our advisories and schools. This gets this out into the public. Sure. And bring this back again for final approval.
Correct.
So this
Yes,
is
sir.
that first phase of that, kind of like last year. We got feedback, brought it here, went to receive more feedback, and at that time we can bring in data from those polls.
Right. I would love the data from the all 3, because I had heard about the first 2 and that option A had a stronger response than option B.
Yes, ma'am.
But I know that that is not comprehensive, and this is just totally different than either one of those options. So I'm concerned that we're not. I just want to make sure we're looking at everyone's feedback. That's just my insight. Anybody else? All right. Y'all knew I was going to ask questions as chair. All right, we're going to move on to the discussion agenda. Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Number 16, an update on Chapin High School Stadium project. Mr. Wiseman.
Boss, members of the community. I wanted to give you an update on a project that's basically been in a year in the making, kind of give you an idea of what's going on with this particular project in regards to the Chapin High School Stadium. As you may recall, back in October of last year, the board approved $7 million to $7.5 million for the construction of Chapin High School Stadium and another $1 million for the architectural design. Over the last several months, we've been meeting with both the engineer and the architect to discuss the progress of that. Back about 4 weeks ago, they came up with a GMP, which is the gross maximum pricing. For the cost, it came back to us at $9.9 million, which far exceeds the $7.5 million that was allotted for this particular project. So we've gone back to both the architect and engineers to talk about ways how we can still fund this project with the money that was provided to us, meet as many of the concerns and the requirements for the 5A stadium project, and at the same time stay within budget. So what we have proposed, or just to advise you of, is that we're talking about looking at each. The issue is just looking at it exceeds the cost that you provided us and looking at phasing it in. We have not got the actual cost from the engineer or the architect yet about what each phase would look like, but we're had a brief discussion out in the hallway with one of them, and we plan on talking with them both tomorrow just to see what kind of timeline that we have to come back with each of these projects in phases, in a sense, independent of each other, but they can be done at the same time. But what we didn't want to do is be able to delay something because we can't tie in sewers at the right time, or we can't bring in the right equipment during this time. So we want to try to move forward with as many projects as we can, but again, keeping in line with the budget. So we will come back to you once we have some good data with the actual cost for each project. This is just something that we looked at. It's not a commitment to the actual phases. Once we have a cost price and a timeline, we'll come back with you with a recommendation. Any questions?
Do we have any questions? Does anyone have any questions? So I just want to clarify for the record and just from questions that I've gotten from the community. Originally, we were hoping that we would have the stadium done at the beginning of the football season. Is that, can you kind of give some thoughts? I know that you're talking, you don't know a timeline, but are the projects going to start in time for football season?
No, ma'am. I'm just going to be honest with you. Based on the supply chain and the projects that they're looking at, a best guess, and I will say guess based on the engineer and the architect's information, we're looking at should be finishing about a November timeframe.
So they're going to be working on the stadium during football season?
Yes, ma'am.
Will that impact the football season?
Yes, ma'am.
How will that impact the football season?
You will not be able to play on the football field.
Okay. And will we get a presentation on the phases from the contractor at some point?
Yes, ma'am. Once we sit down and talk to them, and they've got to have time. We presented this to them last week, so they really just haven't had a good time to sit down, come up with the schematics, and go back out to the bidders and look at a price line. So we hope to get a rough idea of what kind of timeline is before the next board meeting. And again, I emphasize a rough idea because it really depends on getting back with the subcontractors and getting some prices locked in. But we will provide you information every step of the way.
All right, so we're trying to get a plan together relatively quickly so that at least the ground breaks sometime at the beginning of 2023?
That's my hope, yes, ma'am. I just got to be careful about, we need to make sure that we understand the supply timeline. Some of this equipment, when we met a month ago, was about 12 months out. So, just basically because of supply issues and getting parts on order. But again, we're looking at how we can work this so we can get as much done as possible. I would be hesitant to say that we could play in November or during football season, only because I don't want to give you false hopes.
Okay. Does anybody else? Mr. Satterfield?
Yeah, Mr. Wiseman, have y'all talked at all with the athletic directors about this because of scheduling, and maybe they could do home and away using some, I know when Dutch Fork High School first opened, I think they used Irmo's Field somewhat, or,
I'm trying to think, about a month ago, before this plan came in effect, before we knew the cost, we already looked at delaying some of the football games just because of the timeline that the architect and engineer presented to us. They knew they couldn't get some of the parts in, so we already looked at trying to change and do most of them away, obviously with the visitors team, in some cases in Emerald or Dutch Fork. Yes, sir.
yeah.
But we haven't sit down with them. We want to present this to you before we sit down and talk to them as well.
Well, you might want to, and I appreciate what you're saying, but you might want to just say, this is a possibility you probably should be thinking, because I know that being an old football coach, they work on that stuff well in advance, so.
Yes, sir.
But anyway, that's just a suggestion.
Mr. Scully?
Mr. Wiseman, I understand that this project in total is also kind of viewed as a revenue generator as well. And I know when you come back for additional information to bring us, could you provide a breakdown by chance of what the projected revenue would be for phases 1, 2, and 3, and then what the projected revenue for the stadium would be for if all 4 phases were completed, just so that we can see a difference in, because the question occurred to me when I saw your schematic, if the concourse includes additional concessions or, even additional seating that could generate revenue. I'd like to see a breakdown of what we're looking at for phases 1 through 3 and what we'd be looking at from projected for all 4 phases.
And what we're trying to reach is the requirement by South Carolina High School League for a 5A team to host second-round playoffs is seating requirements of 5,000. I think we'll see that just by a little bit. We'll know more here in the next couple of weeks. So we can give you a rough estimate based on the number of seats that are being, available to sell. So yes, sir.
Yeah, and the reason I'm asking is I'd just like to see to evaluate it from a cost standpoint, would it be, if there's significant or substantial revenue generation for all 4 in addition to, rather, as opposed to just the 3, maybe it would be, that changes the dynamic there of the cost, and perhaps we could consider that. That's the only reason I'm asking.
And what we need to look at is, as we go through these phases, is still being able to do concessions, still have access to the restrooms, provide visitor lockers. So we're looking at those items first, so that as soon as we can get back on the football field, we're still a fully functional stadium.
Sure.
I have a question. Is there a way that when we kind of go through these phases that that the contractor can come up and kind of show us visually, hey, this is what phase 1 is, this is the increased seating, this is the press box, these are the visitors, phase 3 is the visitors side locker room, right? And then phase 4 is the concourse, is that correct?
Yes,
Is there a
ma'am.
way
And again,
that-
that's based
just
on
to
the
kind of see what it looks like how we do it in phases visually, and as we're talking about the numbers, like how expensive each phase is and what phase we can do concurrently. So when Mr. Scully was talking about which phase may produce different revenue based off of capacity, I'm assuming is kind of where you were going with that. We can kind of see what that looks like. And we can ask questions about how long it takes for the phases to actually get built.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? Mr. Hogan?
Just to make sure I heard you correctly, the phase with the press box does get us into ADA compliance, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and the phase
With
1 with
the-
the seating would put us in compliance with South Carolina High School League to host playoff games.
Yes, sir.
Third phase, of course, is the,
Phase 3, we just need to make sure we're in compliance with the high school league as far as
compliance,
visiting the
correct, with the
locker rooms and
room. But regardless of what the revenue could potentially generate, we're bound to the dollars that we have to
Yes, sir.
spend. There is no magic pot to get an additional sum of money, correct?
Is that an offer, sir?
No, I want to make sure I'm clear with
Okay.
that it ultimately comes down to a prioritization of making sure that we get the best bang for our buck right now in this economy, correct?
Yes, sir. We just need to make sure we follow the guidelines you give us on the budget requirements. Yes, sir.
Correct, thank you.
Right, and it also helps to know, like, if we do this in a phased approach, like towards the later phases, phase 3 or phase 4, I mean, it seems like every day costs go up. So the longer that we wait to complete the project, the more expensive the project is gonna be. So I just wanna make sure that we have all of the information so that we can, I mean, I know the board's already voted on this, so, I mean, y'all are kind of handling the facilitation of making it happen. I just wanna make sure that we're moving, as responsibly, but as quickly as we can so that we don't price ourselves out of having a stadium
Exactly. Yes, ma'am.
or a school or any of those things, as it seems like everything is going up right now.
Yes,
So,
ma'am.
all right, thank you. Anybody
you.
else?
We have the contractor here. Is there anything you want to say, Ms. Edwards?
Well, I'm happy to answer any questions, or I can, I mean, Dave put it pretty well. We're concerned about the timeline, of course. We had sort of initially, hoped to get this thing done in time to play next season. Where we are right now, we don't foresee that happening. And it has a lot to do with, really, supply chain stuff, as Dave mentioned. It's things out of our control. And this isn't unique to EdCon or the school district. They're having these same discussions at board meetings across the state right now, unfortunately. And it's just something that we're having to deal with in the construction industry. There are things that we can't control. Unfortunately, it's just things that we can't get. But we're going to work with Dave and his team to come up with this phase plan that they presented, and we'll come back to you all with the cost and talk through it all, and hopefully we can get this thing going. So, but if y'all have any questions, I mean, I'm happy to answer anything else.
I think,
All right.
thank you.
Thank y'all.
All right. That moves us to item 17 on the agenda, discussion and first reading on proposed revisions to Board Policy BDE, Board Committees, Exhibit I.
I'm going to ask Ms. Paul to step to the podium to help us lead this. This is a recommendation coming from the Policy Committee regarding Board Policy BDE. We heard from the Inspector General as well in terms of safeguards from the latest report on issue November 2022 about safeguards. And this one was the board policy outlining the how the internal auditor would be established. So you take it away from there.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Ross, members of the board. Thank you for having me again tonight. I did just want to, the biggest change here is regarding our board policy in regards to standing committees. So as he mentioned, if we do choose to add an internal auditor, we would need to have that internal auditor report to someone other than myself or the superintendent. So the recommendation there would be that the internal auditor would report to the audit committee, which would be a subcommittee of the board. So in order to establish a subcommittee of the board, we would have to amend Board Policy BDE, and I would gladly defer to Ms. Huddle if you have any other information.
Yes, the policy committee met, I don't have the exact date, a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and recommended just modifying the policy, because it says we won't have standing committees, but if you're going to have an audit committee, it needs to be a standing committee. So that was the reason for recommending the change to the policy, and then I believe you've got a different policy to address the internal controls, but yes, that was the policy committee's recommendation.
Yes, and I just want to add, the audit committee, because the reason for it to be a standing committee is that they would not be responsible for just the internal audit, like selecting an external auditor. The internal auditor would report to the audit committee throughout the year. There could be special projects that the internal auditor would need to assist with, that they would need to report back to the audit committee throughout the year. So the audit committee could meet several times a year as needed. So that's why we would suggest it'd be a standing committee of the board.
Do we have any comments or questions? Mr. Satterfield?
Yeah, I had just the same question I asked you earlier. Compared to other districts, like I know you obviously are in conversation with Fort Mill, do they have standing committees with regards to something like this, or do you know?
I know that they do not have an internal auditor, so I don't,
I
they do
see.
not have an audit
Okay.
committee, but I'm not sure if they have other standing committees.
Okay. And the second question is, how frequently would this standing committee meet with the internal auditor?
It could be on an as-needed basis. The recommendation from our external auditor currently is at least twice a year. Certainly to choose the external auditor would be one meeting. To also get the report from the external auditor would be another meeting. And then any other times throughout the year that they would need to have discussions with the internal auditor.
Okay. And this recommendation came from the group that did the internal auditing, right?
Yes, sir, that did our external audit, yes, sir.
Okay. The reason I ask is I was looking at the previous board policy, which says that there will be no standing committees. So this is a big change for us. It really is. And if they were not going to meet more than twice or three times a year, why would they not just present it to the whole board?
I think that could be your choice. In speaking with our external auditor about having either the full board or a subset of the board, whenever the full board meets, it is in public session. If there is a quorum, motions can be made. If it's a subcommittee of the board and there is not a quorum, then it is not, the public does not have to necessarily, be invited. And a lot of times when it does pertain to internal auditor, there are a lot of confidential matters. So it could be either way, I believe.
Yeah. In being as transparent as we can with the whole board and removing, I guess, all barriers, I was just concerned when I read that. So I guess this is the first reading, so I guess we'll have opportunity for more discussion if we decide. Yes, Ms. Huddle? I'm not calling on
I'm
you.
sorry.
Ms.
Ms.
Huddle,
Huddle, you are
would you like to speak?
recognized. Out of order,
I
Mr.
think that-
Satterfield.
I think your question makes a lot of sense. I'm actually on the audit committee of the board. I'm on the board of a life insurance company. I'm on the audit committee as well. And I did want to clarify that the committee would not make any decisions. As Ms. Paul said, things could be presented to the committee, and then the committee would make recommendations to the full board. And a good example of why you don't really want to do that in public is one of the things that an audit committee usually approves is the internal audit plan. You don't want to advertise that because if the area knows they're going to get audited, they do things different than they've been doing them today. Another example of why you don't want to do that in public is we recently had to use a forensic auditor for a situation at a particular school. That's something that if we had an internal auditor, they could have done that, and it would have actually been less expensive, and they could bring that information back to the audit committee without, an active investigation in front of the full board. But anyway, I did want to clarify that the audit committee could not make decisions. They would just hear things and make recommendations to the full board. Also, just wanted to point out, I did look at this. Deloitte, which is one of the big four audit firms, they actually recommend that the internal audit, when the internal audit function reports to the audit committee, it allows internal auditors to remain structurally separate from management and enhance objectivity. So that's why that's typically done as well.
Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, I want to ask another question.
Yeah, Mr.
Ms. Huddle knows a lot more about this than I do, obviously. But other boards, like corporate boards and insurance boards, they don't meet as frequently as we meet. And I guess that's one of my questions. And if it's only twice a year or 3 times a year, and when I meant transparent, I didn't mean that we should expose, I was just talking about as far as us as a board. If we're getting information from another committee, well, we get the information that the committee shares with us. And I don't doubt that it will be good information, but I was just thinking, if it's only going to be twice or 3 times a year, why not just include the whole board? But I was not part of the original discussion, so I'm not privy to all that information, but that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
You could. The reason, as Ms. Paul stated, is you have a quorum then, so we would have to do certain things in executive session and then certain things in public, and it would just make it last longer. But you could do that. I mean, I will say personally, I thought that the committee approach that we had worked well because, as you see, I don't know what time it is, but I'm tired. It helped because you can see, even tonight, there's some people that have a lot of questions, and there's some people that really don't have questions. And that way, the committees, the people that really want to ask a lot of questions and get a lot of information can come, and it's not requiring all of this. But that's obviously for us to decide. We could make, the audit committee could be a committee of the full board.
It's all right. Ms. Paul, I have a question. Where did the language for the audit committee in this policy come from?
So I met with the Policy Review Committee a few weeks ago, as Ms. Huddle stated, and it was part of that discussion, but I will let Ms. Huddle lead because she really did lead that.
Yeah, I took notes during the policy committee, and that was the
So we
language.
wrote this policy?
Yes. Well, the original all we did was make some minor changes to it, yes.
So I believe that there are audit committees in other school districts, and like, for example, like the University of South Carolina has an audit committee, and I believe that in some situations, it's not just board members on that committee. And I would be curious, and I'm just saying this to the board, as you know, I would like to see some more policies and see how they're actually, like, the committees are actually implemented. If there are other people involved in committees or not, that may not be a good idea. I'm not sure.
Ms. Blackburn-Hines, I will say I spoke with our external auditor today, and she did recommend that there were at least 2 outside members from the board on the committee, one being a financial expert and then one being a parent or other community member. She said that is what she normally sees.
Okay, you spoke to JAG?
Yes.
Okay. I personally, I think that an internal auditor is a good idea, and I'm not the biggest fan of committees because I believe that meeting in the presence of the full board, we can have conversations with everyone. I think that that's probably the most transparent way to handle it. I'm just not necessarily, for this is such an important part of this policy that I would like to be able to see some options on how, or get some feedback on how some of these audit committees are working for schools, whether that's a university or a state agency or a school district. That's just my thoughts that I'm saying out loud to fellow board members. And if you have any feedback on that, that's great. I think that your feedback from JAG was fantastic.
Yes, and I can certainly look at other policies and see what they have as well.
Okay. Anything, Mr. Scully?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I echo your concerns about the transparency and having and what Mr. Satterfield said about having certain, just a small number of board members on the committee. I do fear that even though minutes may be taken, information would be lost or not presented to all the members as far as, the discussions. We wouldn't have the details on the discussions that take place. Likewise, the public wouldn't, I think it would increase their burden from a transparency perspective to have an additional committee and additional time that they'd have to devote in order to follow along with the activities of the district. And just one more thing that they would have to keep up with. It's hard enough with just the current board meetings that we have. So I'd also be concerned about, the policy currently today is that there are no standing committees. And that's not recommended. Standing committees are not recommended by the South Carolina School Board Association as well. And so once were we to amend the policy and all of a sudden we go from no to having one committee, that's a slippery slope. And before you know it, we're going to find ourselves, well, what about two committees? We can do two. That'll be okay. And everything will be justified. I think the safest route personally would be to not have a standing committee. But yeah, I don't have enough information, so I welcome the information on that.
All right, anybody else? All right. So with that, we'll move to discussion item number 18.
We would normally make a first reading on that one. Do we want to defer?
Do we want, I'll take a motion whether to defer the first reading on this policy or to make a motion on this policy. Mr. Scully?
Due to being new and not having all the information, I would make a motion to defer the first reading on this policy.
To another meeting? Okay. Do I have a second? Mr. Satterfield? I saw that. All right, all in favor of the motion? 1, 2. All right, that's 5 to, all opposed? 5 to 2. All right, so that motion has, or that policy first reading has been deferred to the next meeting or to another meeting. Let's move to discussion agenda 18, which is the discussion and first reading on proposed revisions to board policy DIE, fiscal accounting and audits for Exhibit J.
Point of order, I guess, since 17 is deferred,
Do we want to defer?
I'm just asking Ms. Paul, or can that
We
operate
could
independently?
we could still discuss 18 because it really just talks about internal controls. It doesn't mention an internal auditor or an audit committee. It's just discussing internal controls, but it's up to the board.
Thank you.
I'll defer to the board. Do we want to? Mr. Scully?
I make a motion to defer the policy reading, the first reading.
All right, do we have a second? Ms. Snipes, seconds. All right, so we have a motion on the floor right now to defer policy DIE, fiscal accounting and audits, Exhibit J. So all in favor, okay, Ms. Huddle, for discussion?
Ms. Paul, you said the recommended changes don't impact the policy we just discussed, correct?
Correct.
I would recommend that we go ahead and talk about this. Richland 2 just had an audit, and a lot of the changes that Ms. Paul has recommended touch on the things that the OIG took issue with Richland 2, and I think it's just, we're not finalizing the policy tonight, we're just discussing in first reading, so I would recommend that we go ahead with that.
All right, so we have a motion on the floor to defer the discussion in first reading, so we'll vote on that first. So all in favor of deferring to the next meeting, raise your hand. That's 3. All opposed? All right, that's 4. All opposed? You're for it? Okay, so for deferment is 5 to, and then all opposed to 2. All right, so we're going to defer this conversation to another meeting, and that also gives us some time to review I know for myself, the next time that we put this on the agenda, we can refer the IG report for Richland 2 so that we can be informed of what those policies are or what their recommendations are. All right, so that moves us to discussion item 19. Thank you, Ms. Paul. which is discussion and first reading on proposed revisions to Board Policy IMDB flag displays, proposed revisions to Board Policy IHAC social studies education, and proposed new Board Policy IMDA patriotic exercises, Exhibit K.
We're going to ask Ms. Tina McCaskill to come forward and bring these policies.
Good evening, Chair Hines and new board members, Dr. Ross, all board members as well, but welcome. We have two policies that are being revised, one that is a new policy, all due to laws being changed, and so that the section 59-1-325 is what's caused these changes to happen. So the shifts happen with policy IMDB. You'll notice that the word motto is being added to that title, so it's flag motto displays. And you'll see that the motto displays are being added to that particular policy. The social studies education policy, IHAC, the days that are for Memorial Days, celebration days for social studies education are being moved to a new policy which follows the model policy from the state, which is IMDA, and that lists your Patriot Day, your Constitution and Citizenship Day, Veterans Day, Patriotism Week, and then the Youth Patriotic Societies. So they kind of go hand in hand. I know it's 3 separate policies, but all of the changes go hand in hand with that. So it's recommended that you go forward and move to second and final reading with those.
Do we have any questions? I know I had some questions about what this was when it first came up, and I actually pulled up Title 59, and this is pretty much just verbatim state law, making our policies comply with state law.
That's correct.
Yep. All right, do I have a motion for first reading on this policy? Going once? Do I not? Ms.
I
Barr?
move, I move that we approve first reading of revisions to Board Policy IMDB, flag displays, and proposed revisions to Board Policy IHAC, social studies education, and proposed new Board Policy IMDA, patriotic exercises.
All right, do I have a second? Ms. Barnhart seconds? All right.
I second that.
All right, Ms.
Oh, I'm
Barnhart,
sorry.
she
You did
beat
already.
you to it. All right, all in favor of this motion? All right, that's 7-0. And that moves us to our final item on the agenda, number 20. Do I have a motion to adjourn? All right.
I'd like to make the motion that we adjourn the meeting.
All right, I have a second. Ms. Barnhart, seconds. All in favor? All right, that's 7-0. Thank you very much. Everyone have a great Thanksgiving holiday.